Chapter 1. The Divine Revolution history remembers him as a visionary, a dreamer, or a madman. But in the cold ledgers of dark records, Akhenaten is remembered as the pharaoh who liquidated an empire. When Amenhotep IV ascended the throne of the 18th dynasty, Egypt was the wealthiest nation on earth. Gold flowed like the Nile, and the temples of Amun-Ra and Thebes held more land than the king himself. But within 5 years, the young king would change his name to declare the old gods dead, and trigger a systemic collapse that nearly erased Egypt from the map. This was not just a religious change. It was a hostile takeover of the national treasury. By abolishing the cult of Amun, Akhenaten seized the vast estates, the thousands of cattle, and the massive gold reserves belonging to the priesthood. It was the largest redistribution of wealth in human history. But instead of reinvesting this wealth into the empire's defense or infrastructure, Akhenaten spent it on a single, impossible dream. A city built in the middle of a barren desert. Chapter 2. Amarna. The City of Debt. The construction of Akhetaten, Modandai Amarna, was a logistical nightmare and a financial catastrophe. Akhenaten chose a site where nothing grew and where no water flowed. From a branding perspective, it was a pure site. From an economic perspective, it was a suicide mission. To build a capital city for 50,000 people from scratch in less than 3 years. The pharaoh had to divert every architect, every stonemason, and every soldier from the borders to the desert. To speed up construction, Akhenaten's engineers invented a new building technique. These were small, standardized limestone blocks that could be carried by a single man. This modular construction was the ancient world's version of fast food architecture. It allowed the city to rise quickly, but at a staggering cost. The quality of stone was poor, and the haste meant that thousands of workers died from exhaustion and heat stroke. Amarna was not built with love. It was built with the desperate speed of a man trying to outrun reality. Chapter 3. The Starvation of the Provinces. While Akhenaten was composing hymns to his sun god, the Atan, the rest of Egypt was suffering. The traditional economic centers of Thebes and Memphis were being starved of resources. The taxes that once maintained the irrigation canals and grain silos of the Nile Delta were now being funneled into the desert city. Archaeology at Amarna reveals a dark truth. Despite the beautiful art, the common people were malnourished. Examination of skeletons from the Amarna cemeteries shows extreme levels of scurvy, stunted growth, and spinal fractures. Even the children were forced into hard labor to meet the pharaoh's deadlines. The City of Light was fueled by the bodies of a generation. Akhenaten had broken the social contract. He promised a paradise under the sun, but delivered a work camp where the rations were thin and the work was eternal. Chapter 4. The Abandoned Empire. As Akhenaten turned his eyes inward toward his private utopia, he turned his back on the world. The Amarna Letters, a collection of diplomatic clay tablets, revealed the desperate cries for help from Egypt as vassals. In Canaan and Syria, kings wrote to Akhenaten, begging for troops and gold to defend against the rising Hittite threat and the marauding Habiru tribes. Akhenaten ignored them. His military budget had been reallocated to temple decorations and royal processions. For the first time in centuries, the Egyptian army was stagnant. Vassal states that had paid tribute for generations realized that the pharaoh no longer cared or no longer had the means to protect them. The tribute stopped flowing. The international trade routes for tin and silver were cut off. The empire's passive income vanished, leaving the treasury entirely dependent on the dwindling domestic harvest. Chapter 5. The Art of Deception. Akhenaten's reign is famous for its unique art style: long necks, bloated bellies, and spindly limbs. While art historians call this naturalism, Dark Records calls it a propaganda shift. This new art was designed to break the image of the traditional warrior king. Akhenaten was portrayed as a domestic family man, basking in the rays of the Atan. This was a calculated move to distract the elite from the military losses in the north. If the pharaoh was a god who communicated directly with the sun, his failures on the battlefield didn't matter, or so he thought. He spent millions on colossal statues of himself that broke all traditional proportions, a visual dominance intended to mask his political weakness. It was the most expensive rebranding campaign in the history of the 18th dynasty. Chapter 6. The police state. To enforce his new religion and ensure the flow of resources to Amarna, Akhenaten created a new class of officials. These were not the traditional aristocrats, but men of low birth who owed everything to the king. He created a paramilitary force to roam the country, smashing the statues of the old gods and collecting the hidden wealth of the temples. Egypt became a police state. Corruption flourished as these new officials took their cut of the confiscated temple gold. The traditional bureaucracy, which had kept Egypt stable for 1,000 years, was dismantled and replaced by a loyalist cult. This destroyed the expertise needed to manage the Nile's complex agriculture. When the floods were irregular, there was no one left with the knowledge to manage the grain reserves. The system was failing from the top down. Chapter 7. The Black Plague and the Fall. Near the end of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, a devastating plague swept through the Near East and hit Amarna with full force. Some historians believe it was brought by Hittite prisoners or soldiers returning from the neglected borders. The overcrowded and malnourished workers' quarters in Amarna became a breeding ground for death. The royal family was not spared. One by one, the princesses and the queen herself, Nefertiti, disappeared from the records. The economy, already on the brink of collapse, completely shattered. The death toll was so high that the fields remained unharvested. The pharaoh, who claimed to be the source of all life, was now presiding over a city of the dead. His city of light had become a tomb. Chapter 8. The Damnatio Memoria. When Akhenaten finally died, the reaction was swift and violent. His successors, led by the young Tutankhamun, and eventually the General Horus, didn't just move the capital back, they tried to erase Akhenaten from time itself. They tore down the Telatot blocks of Amarna and used them as rubble fill for new temples. They hacked his face off every monument. This erasure was an economic necessity. To restore the faith of the people and the stability of the economy, the state had to return to the old ways. But the damage was done. The 18th dynasty, once the greatest power in the world, was mortally wounded. The Amarna period left Egypt bankrupt, its army weakened, and its gods humiliated. Akhenaten's dream was an economic nightmare that cost Egypt its status as the world's only superpower.